Both teachers and students often try to use TV shows to improve pronunciation, but just how effective is it? Well, I spoke to Anthony Hanf and Heather Reichmuth, who had conducted their own study into just how effective this is. This was recorded just after their presentation at the KOTESOL conference in 2016. It's pretty useful stuff. Okay, so we're thinking about using sitcoms to develop pronunciation, and sitcoms is something that a lot of students say they do, right? They're watching Friends,
right.
Or they're watching something else. So could you tell us how you set up your experiments first?
So basically in class we used a 50-minute class to set up the experiment, and we had students watch How I Met Your Mother for about 25 minutes, and then after that we had them participate in an activity where they're using the language and participating into a reciprocal teaching activity, and while they're watching we gave them a worksheet to use to pay attention to the sitcom, specifically the captions, and so we gave them like the sentences or phrases that the characters would say, and we blanked out one or two words.
And that was given in advance?
In advance, yeah.
Yes, and those the words that we blanked out were usually idioms or expressions that maybe they weren't familiar with, but that a native speaker would know or be familiar with.
Yeah, but force them to pay attention to to the language and to what was happening and who was speaking and like that.
Were you focused on particular phonemes when you were choosing the idioms?
No,
not at all.
Not like that. But also, How I Met Your Mother, is all of it kind of suitable for the class? There's a lot of kind of sexiness in there, right?
That's what they liked
it was pretty tame. Yeah, they did like it. Was pretty tame. I wouldn't say there were some parts where it was kind of like ha ha ha. But
fast forward. Just skip.
Yeah, but in general, it was pretty tame. Yeah.
Okay, so you had two groups. So one group was getting.
So we had beginners and intermediates. Yep, and then we had.
Who were treated by us.
Yeah, who were treated by our classes, and then we had beginners and intermediates who were untreated, and so we tested all of them at the beginning and all of them at the end. And
okay. So untreated means no videos, no
just regular class, yeah.
Regular boring class.
Yeah, boring class, yeah, right. So, and then we did pre-recording and post-recording, and then we rated them. We had our native speaker raters who were our colleagues, yeah. And we gave them a rubric, and basically they got double rated. Each student's sample got double rated and averaged, and then we compared their rankings. So we looked at Z-scores, and a Z-score basically tells you it puts a ranking to a student, and it gives you a percentage. So that percentage tells you how many students did better than me and how many students did worse than me. Okay. And then we gave them a Z-score for the second ranking, for the second post-test, and again, how many students did better than me in a percentage form and how many students did worse. Mm-hmm. And then we took all of those Z-scores and we added them all up, positive and negative, because some of them went down 30% or up 30%, and then we averaged the classes, and our treated groups, they all either maintained or improved their pronunciation.
Let's see. So what kind of test did you give then? Like, did they have to say set phrases, or did they?
We had questions.
Okay.
Questions that we had prepared beforehand, and the questions were purposely made so that students would have to answer past tense or get kind of jumbled up with grammar. They're basically questions like who is like who is your best friend and why, for example.
Okay. Simple questions.
Very simple. And they were asked similar types of questions for pre and post tests, and and they knew about it a day before. We were told there's no pressure, just come. Mm-hmm. It's a participation activity. Just come, get recorded.
Right. And they knew about the questions, or they just knew
about
there
the
would
question.
be something?
Yeah, they knew that because we didn't want them nervous about answering the question.
Okay.
They couldn't use any notes. They couldn't prepare for it. We didn't want them to memorize something and jumble up the results like that. So.
And were they aware that what you were testing for?
They were not aware. Yeah. No. So and that's a good question. What we were testing for is pronunciation, but what is that? So two constructs that we tested was number one is pronunciation features. So and we jumbled all that together because for our raters we didn't want to be too in-depth, too detailed, but what we mean by pronunciation features is rhythm, intonation, stress, things like that, supersegmentals, and then you know that.
That's my favorite.
And then the other construct was intelligibility or L1 interference, and so when they speak in English, how much can you hear their Korean accent, and did that interfere with the intelligibility or understanding. And so we had our raters look for those two things, and they rated each sample twice and averaged. So.
Okay. So when they were watching the videos in class, like how were you using just certain scenes, or were you using
one episode?
One entire episode,
Yes,
so about
per
22
class.
minutes?
Yes, approximately, yeah. 25, yeah. It depended on the episode.
Okay.
But we basically wanted that because we had a 15-minute class to do this in. So we wanted something that was about 25 minutes max, that they can watch it a full episode, take notes, fill in the gap fill, and at the end we could do the activity. We can go over, basically the gap fill, ask if they have any questions, and then they go ahead and do the jigsaw activity.
So I think this is the key part of your experiment, was that it was not just passive viewing, right? They didn't just
Right.
watch an episode, that there was some activities.
We didn't throw in a video and say, okay, we're going to be in the back.
And now you are better.
Taking a nap, that's all right.
Right. So, because I think when students are doing it alone, it does, often when they describe it, it is just passive viewing.
Right, and they're maybe not focused on specific words or vocabulary, and when you're not really focused on something, like what was it, Schmidt's
noticing hypothesis.
Right,
yes,
right.
They're
They're
one of
not
our
really-
underpinnings. Yeah.
That's right. That they basically don't know what they're looking for. I know I've watched Korean dramas, I just watch it and it's fun, and sometimes I pick up a word or a phrase,
Right.
but maybe I could have had so much more from that episode, for example. If
Comprehensible input.
exactly.
Okay, so let's focus on the results then. So what did you find from doing this? And sorry, how long was it? How many weeks?
13 in
13
total.
weeks.
13
yeah,
weeks,
13
okay.
weeks, yeah.
What did you find as your results?
Well, the interesting thing is this has never really been, according to our knowledge, it's
To our
never been
knowledge,
really tested before. But the interesting assumption that we made was by purely giving students input, and we could affect their output and the quality of their output in pronunciation. And so for beginners, we found that the treated group for beginners improved, on average, they improved their pronunciation features by 8%, Z-score on average. And the untreated group regressed by 8%.
Wow, okay.
And I can't say that they got worse, because this is a Z-score, which means their ranking got worse, which means they were outperformed by the treated group.
Okay.
So I can't say that you're going to get worse if you don't watch it,
8%, man.
You better start
8%.
watching. Specifically the show.
But that was the biggest. But that was the biggest shift, and that's a 16% differential, So,
Right.
which is interesting. And for the intermediate, there was it's almost equal for pronunciation features. They, whether you're either treated or untreated, your pronunciation features, it doesn't look like it's going to change much. But the interesting thing is for the L1 intelligibility, and your first language. The intermediates improved there by 4%?
Yes.
And the treated decreased or regressed by about 3%. Yeah,
something.
3 point something. So
So it sounds like it's always the same, either plus or minus then. It's plus 8%, minus 8%, plus 4%, minus 4%.
well, that's on average. So they just outperformed. Yeah.
Okay.
They-
It's not systematic.
It's not systematic. Yeah, it's not systematic at all. That's just how the numbers came up. Yeah. So which does make sense. When you think about it, beginners have a lot to have a lot to improve on with their pronunciation features at that low level. Even a little bit of exposure can affect your speaking.
Right.
And then if you look at intermediates, intermediate is a huge, broad.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get to intermediate, and it's really hard to get out of intermediate. If you've ever learned a foreign language, and so you already have some pronunciation features, but it's more of refining. And what we found out is you're refining, getting rid of that intelligibility issue, getting rid of your first language tone and kind of rhythm like that. And
Which
so
is hard to get rid of. It's
Absolutely,
a habit.
yeah.
It's a habit.
Yeah.
And so that does make sense in terms of when you think about it, we kind of see how that helps intermediates. So depending on your level, it helps you in different ways. But of course, we can't be sure because we have a small sample size.
So how many students was it in total?
25 and 18, and then 13 17.
Look, we're language guys, we're not math guys.
Mathematicians here.
So
People at home
30
can
plus
work that out.
55 plus 18 is 65, 77, so 73, 74, maybe 75 students total, yeah.
75. Yeah. Okay, so I guess, so finally then, Heather, what does this mean for teachers?
For teachers, well, hopefully what it means is if there is focused learning happening with a sitcom or a TV show where students can concentrate and focus on certain language, that hopefully, we hope, fingers crossed, that they are actually improving their English pronunciation features and hopefully also intelligibility as well.
Yeah, so something that teachers can use in the classroom and know that it's helping them in a certain way, and not feel guilty for just popping in a movie. But
It also has to be, it has to be a learning,
An
tool.
intentional,
Yes, it can't be just only.
Just like, yeah. So, I mean, for teachers, I think it's not so much for just teachers, but just for language learners in general. If
exactly.
you want to improve your pronunciation, you can know that if you're a beginner, this is how you can improve your pronunciation. And if you're an intermediate student, this is how you can benefit from sitcoms.
Get your fingertips on the top of intermediate.
Yeah,
and
right.
Just pull yourself
pull yourself to scrape your way. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
really
you.
good.